Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Academy of Sciences. It's my privilege to welcome you here for the final event of our Art and Technology Week. And it's so nice of you to be in here with us when it's so nice and beautiful outside. So thank you and welcome. A couple of housekeeping items, if you don't mind. Silence your cell phones and any other sort of noise-making device that you have. And if you are engaging in social media, the hashtag is DuBois data. If you're not already on our CPNAS mailing list, please take a moment to sign up as you leave. The pads are out on the table outside of the auditorium. That's the best way of being kept informed of our upcoming exhibits and events. Speaking of which, this Thursday at 7 p.m. back in this auditorium, we will participate once again in the annual DC Environmental Film Festival. So please join us for the DC premiere of the film Desert X, which is a documentary of the desert art installation that occurred in Palm Springs in 2017. So as I mentioned, this past week at the NAS has been Art and Technology Week. Among other things, we have hosted a colloquium celebrating the anniversary of the groundbreaking 1968 exhibit Cybernetic Serendipity. This is an exhibit that brought together art and computers for the first time. It was initiated in London, and the exhibit traveled here to the Corcoran in D.C., and then to the Exploratorium in San Francisco. This past week, we looked back in history leading up to Cybernetic Serendipity. It inquired as to where we have been since, and imagined a future where different disciplines and areas of investigation inform one another. So as part of this week, we have organized 3 exhibits that I hope you will take time to visit if you haven't already. In the West Gallery, which is through the Great Hall and to the right, there is the work by Paul Brown, and then in the Annex Gallery next to it is the work by Neri Oxman. Neri Oxman is the director of the Mediated Matter Group at MIT Media Lab. The third exhibit, the one that provides the framework for our discussion here today, is Luc DuBois' Love in the Time of Data. And we'll have a chance to go up to the exhibit afterwards, but it's right outside the auditorium door, and the staircase to the right will take you up to the gallery. So now I'd like to turn the program over to Anne Goodyear, the curator of Love in the Time of Data. Along with her husband, Frank Goodyear, Anne is co-director of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. She is the former curator of prints and drawings at the National Portrait Gallery, and as much as I like Maine, I really have a resentment that Maine took Frank and Anne away from us. Smithsonian, where she was the curator of prints and drawings at the National Portrait Gallery, Smithsonian Institution, where she became the first curator to collect digital and time-based art. And has curated numerous exhibits, published and lectured widely about modern and contemporary American art and portraiture, and she is one of DC's favorite. Please help me welcome Anne Collins Goodyear.
it's a tremendous pleasure to be here this afternoon, and I have to begin my remarks with a very, very warm thanks to J.D. Tolasik and his extraordinary colleague Alana Quinn for their partnership and inspiration in the opportunity to bring Luc DuBois' work here to the National Academy on an occasion that I think could not be more fitting. And needless to say, I am absolutely thrilled to have the chance to be here this afternoon for a conversation with my dear friend, Luc DuBois. As many of you are no doubt already aware, our Luc DuBois is co-director and associate professor of integrated media at the Tandon School of Engineering at New York University. He is an internationally regarded composer, artist, and performer whose work explores the temporal, verbal, and visual structures of cultural ephemera. It has been a pleasure to have an opportunity to collaborate with him on a couple of projects about which we'll have an opportunity to speak later today. Luc holds his doctorate in musical composition from Columbia University and has lectured and taught worldwide on interactive sound and video performance. His work is currently on view at Sites Santa Fe, as well, of course, as here at the National Academy of Sciences. In addition to these exhibitions, Luc's work has been recently exhibited in a number of other contexts, including The Choice is Yours, hosted by Bitforms Gallery in the fall of 2016, and Our Luc DuBois Now, an exhibition originated at the Ringling Museum of Art in 2014 that went on to have a national tour, and I'm happy to say, which we were able to install at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art in 2016. His work has been collected and exhibited internationally, including by the Smithsonian American Art Museum and National Portrait Gallery here in Washington, D.C. An active visual and musical collaborator, DuBois is not only an extraordinary visual artist, but also software engineer who has co-authored Jitter, a software suite for the real-time manipulation of matrix data developed by the San Francisco-based software company Cycling 74. This extraordinary combination of professional sources of expertise make today's occasion particularly apt, the opportunity to put an exclamation point at the end of an international program over the course of the past week here at the National Academy of Sciences, dedicated, as you have heard, to creativity and collaboration, exploring intersections between technology, art, and science. The wonderful program that has unfolded over the past several days was organized by Ben Schneiderman, Manish Argawala, Alisa Goodman, Youngmoo Kim, and Roger Molina. And as J.D. Talisic has indicated, the event was inspired by the 50th anniversary of Yasha Reichardt's 1968 exhibition, Cybernetic Serendipity, juxtaposing the work of engineers and artists. Luc Dubois' work has long fascinated me due to its intellectual, aesthetic, and digital sophistication. And as I noted earlier, I have had the pleasure of working with him directly on the development of two artworks. In 2011, the National Portrait Gallery, where I was then a curator, commissioned Luc to create a portrait of the architects of Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Luc started from a simple premise. How does the metaphor of searching, part of every human life, and the key goal of Google itself, relate to Brin and Page? What were they searching for to create Google? And what were they searching in their own lives more broadly? DuBois came up with a brilliant approach to create a montage portrait of the pair using clips of public statements from interviews and speeches, all of which could be accessed from YouTube, a part of Google itself. Between 2015 and 2016, I had the good fortune to work again with Luc on the creation of a new portrait of DeRay McKesson, one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement and an alumnus of Bowdoin College. The complex portrait, combining video footage of McKesson with tweets from the activist, features questions that were formulated by today's Bowdoin students. Indeed, Luc Dubois' ability to see the philosophical dimension of communication and expression in the digital era has also formed the basis for other projects, including Pop Icon, Britney of 2010, which explores the evolution of Britney Spears' public identity, and Hindsight is Always 2020 of 2008, which uses textual analysis to capture and present 66 most frequently used words by each president in his State of the Union address up to George W. Bush. Other of Dubois' works, such as A More Perfect Union of 2010 to 2011 and Misconnections, explore how personal connections and relationships develop and unfold in the era of social media, exploring how our desire to connect through new media may ironically threaten to reduce our desires to points of data, expressed as keywords and fleeting glances, or how personal connections may fall victim to the solipsistic inability to extricate ourselves from the social, political, and economic forces that seem to keep us in place. As a visual artist, Dubois uses digital technology as a means to comment upon its significance. As he had said, I'm drawn to information space versions of what we used to refer to in media space as culture jamming, using the tools of a particular established medium to critique itself. The results of this work are aesthetically powerful and intellectually challenging, deliberately problematizing the very inadequacy of the interpretive frameworks we use to discern truth. In other words, the relevant facts. DuBois uses his art to reveal and recast modes of picturing that seem to define our world. As Yasha Reichart noted in the introduction to a special 1968 issue of the journal Studio International, which was dedicated to her exhibition, Cybernetic Serendipity, no visitor to the exhibition will know whether they are looking at something made by an artist, an engineer, a mathematician, or an architect. Luc Dubois' work reflects just how powerful a legacy Reichart has produced and demonstrates through his own work the powerful creative new directions that data promises when transformed into an artistic medium. Thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming Luc Dubois, who will provide an overview of some of his recent and historic projects. After that time, Luc and I will have an opportunity to engage in some conversation here on stage, and then we'll then open the floor to the audience. So we very much look forward to your participation in this conversation. Thank you again for being with us, and Luc, we're so glad you can be here.
Hi. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, great. Thanks, Anne. That was the nicest introduction I've ever had. And I want to thank JD and Alana for this beautiful show and for having me down here to DC. I'm going to start a stopwatch so that I don't talk for too long, so then we can all talk. So I'm going to start now. How many of you have ever seen the movie Desperately Seeking Susan? Okay. How many of you have not seen this movie? Okay. Wow, a lot of people have not seen this movie. Okay, all of you need to see this movie. Okay, most people think of this movie as a movie starring Madonna. It is not actually starring Madonna. It is featuring Madonna. It is starring Rosanna Arquette. It was directed by a woman named Susan Seidelman in 1985. What it is sort of about is it's about a couple that communicate, stay in touch, and connect by leaving ads for each other in the back page of the Village Voice. Right. So the idea is the man rolls into town and he will put an ad in the paper. I'll say, "Desperately seeking Susan, please meet me at Pier 20 at 4 o'clock on a Thursday," and they'll rendezvous. Right. Meanwhile, a woman in Fort Lee, New Jersey, who has a little bit too much time on her hands, sort of discovers this is going on and becomes sort of obsessed with it and decides to go and sort of see what this looks like, and somebody gets hit on the head and there's a mistaken identity and shenanigans ensue. All of which is to say the current version of the current version of the back page of the Village Voice is the Misconnections feed on Craigslist. Do you know what this is? Okay, so this is a thing on Craigslist on your local ad site where the way it works is you have a romantic encounter with somebody. Like you meet somebody. So so in New York it's usually on the subway, right? So it's one of these, you were on the F train, you were wearing blue, I couldn't keep my eyes off you, please call me, right? That's the kind of ad you leave. If you have a romantic encounter with somebody and you screw it up, you forget to get their name or their number, right? So I have a theory that people make second-order misconnections all the time, which is to say that, I meet somebody who I think is cute. They meet me. We both leave ads for one another, and then because we're busy people, we forget to check. Right? So at night on my computer, while I sleep, I run this computer program that downloads all the misconnections all over the country, compares the words that are in between, that are in the ads, and tries to find ads where they're talking about each other or the same event. Right, so it estimates a percentage chance. So this is like, not so much. This is like 21% chance that they're talking about each other. If it gets above 85%, I put them in touch. Right, I say, you two should know each other. I'm not sure what this is. I'm not sure if this is art. Maybe it's art. It's definitely not science. It's possibly engineering, but this is what I do. This is working with information, right? This is working with data, but it's working with data in a framework where what I'm ultimately trying to do is bring the data back down to where it belongs, which is language, which is human, which is connection. So that's kind of where I kind of land on all this stuff. The first thing you need to know about me is I flunked out of engineering school. I'm going to hide this for a second. I flunked out of engineering school because I fell in love with a machine, ironically enough. This machine. This is something called the RCA Mark II sound synthesizer. This is still around. It's living at Columbia University at this thing that once upon a time was called the Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center. And it was built by the Radio Corporation of America as part of an elaborate confidence scheme by these three gentlemen here. So these three fellows, this is Milton Babbitt, who is a composer at Princeton University, Peter Mose, who is an engineering staff member at Columbia, and Vladimir Usachevsky, who is a composer at Columbia University. These three gentlemen basically conspired to grift the Radio Corporation of America out of $250,000 of equipment by promising them that if they built the machine to their specifications within 10 years, it would replace the Symphony Orchestra. RCA at the time was a bit like Clear Channel, right? iHeartRadio. So they owned a whole bunch of radio stations all over the country, many of which had unionized radio orchestras. So they were very excited about the possibility of a machine being able to replace all of that. So they fell for it. Within about, I got some sound out of it once. I was sort of the last person to make music on it. I got about, a minute of sound out of it before it took out the power and the whole floor. Sounds like this, right? This is what it sounds like. It's kind of a cool machine. I'm not sure this is going to actually replace the Symphony Orchestra, but it's pretty, right? It's in tune still. It also makes like kind of noisy things, right? You can make it, that kind of thing. Anyway, you get the idea. So, so the thing about this machine, this is from like they installed it around 57, maybe, 56, 57. So the thing is, about 5 years later, right, some smarty pants at Bell Labs invented this thing called a transistor, and the whole thing was basically toast, right? You didn't need it anymore. And within a few years, people were playing things like this that are much smaller. This fits on my table and can do everything that a room-sized machine can do. So I got kind of interested in this kind of technology, and I was really interested in restoring it, and I had a band. Sorry, I don't use PowerPoint because I think PowerPoint, what is the word? PowerPoint corrupts pointlessly. Something like that, I don't remember. So anyway, so I had this band in the 90s, and I would play these machines, right? This is what we looked like back in the day. This is at the kitchen. This is, I had a cellist and a didgeridoo player and a guy with a bunch of drum machines, and then I would play these old synthesizers. And the problem was the technology, the synthesizer technology was very fragile. So I remember playing this one show in the village, and depending on whether the light switch was on in the women's room, the entire system would slow down like a really unfortunate musical interval, like a minor ninth or something. So I'd be like playing a show, and I'd be performing and be like do 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 do, and someone would have to go pee, and it would be like. So that was like not so great. So I switched to a computer. And one of the things we did with the computer is we were trying to address the following problem. We were trying to address that we thought we were boring to watch. So what we did was we would take these cameras, these wireless cameras, sort of radio cameras, and we would embed them in Nerf footballs. Okay, so like little radio-controlled cameras, and we embed them in Nerf football. So like, so we'd like scoop out like the Nerf. Is that the right way of saying that? I don't know what you call that. So the Nerf, yeah. And we put the camera in, and we'd like sellotape it up and pass it out to the audience. And then what you would see on the screen is something that kind of looks like this. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is reacting to my voice. It's moving as I talk. And it's a very simple translation. So this thing, this is called a spectrum analyzer. This is that thing you have on your car stereo that you don't really understand why it's on your car stereo, okay? But this is that thing where, like, if your kids are really high late at night, they're like, that's the guitar, that one, right there, right? So that's what this is. And so what this thing is doing is it's scrubbing time. And so these are low frequencies in my voice. These are high frequencies in my voice. And if I'm saying something very loud, you see now. And if I'm not talking, if there's no energy in that area, you see 10 seconds ago. So that's all it's doing. It's scrubbing time. And that's pretty cool. Because what it allows you to do is it allows you to make like a performance system where like my band would be playing, right? My band would be, so let's review. Right? This is my band, right? So we're like sitting there doing our thing, staring at music stands. And on the backdrop is this whole thing made up of the audience. And so you can do things, it takes like 10 seconds for the imagery to flush. So you can do things like make out and then watch yourself make out. Right, or you can do these like big, like crazy, like Hail Mary passes around this. It was pretty cool. One of the things it proved is that what we were doing was live. Right, there's no way to fake this because I had no Nerf football with all of you together in the studio earlier that day, right? And this is a thing I actually think about a lot with computer technology, right? Like you think about, what, we're all pretty accustomed to seeing computers in creative context now, but maybe 20 years ago that was a little less true. And I always think of it, transparency, I always think of it as sort of a two-part like problem when you're thinking about using modern technology in the arts, right? One problem is a sort of what I call a transparency opacity problem. So this is the thing where like you see a computer in an art museum or you see a computer on stage, and in one way it's completely transparent because like you probably also have a computer. So you kind of know how that works. You're like, oh, there's a computer. I know what a computer is. And it sort of gives you interactivity envy too, because you're like, well, wait a minute, I have a computer too, so how come I'm not the guy on stage? But that's another. But at the same time, a computer is not a cello, right? A computer is a very opaque interface, right? Like if you see somebody on stage with a laptop, they could be checking their email. In fact, they probably are checking their email. Everyone who plays with a computer on stage checks their email on stage. If they say they don't, they're lying to you, right? So this is, right, so it's not like a cello where it has this kind of direct interaction. Somebody could be doing something very, quite abstract. If you want to sound smart, you say things in French. One other way of thinking of this is in terms of aesthetics. Jouissance and plaisir are words that ish map to joy and pleasure in English. They're quite specific. So if you talk to someone who's a native French speaker, they'll know the difference between what is a jouissance item and what is a plaisir item. The performance artist Coco Fusco, who was one of my professors at Columbia, said it the best, so I'm just going to quote her here. A plaisir item would be something like a really nice car. Jouissance would be having sex in the back of a really nice car. Now you all know the difference. Congratulations. So if you have those two things backwards, you have a fetish, right? That's one. If you need the car more than you need the person. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent. But the problem is with the computer is a computer is very much a plaisir item, right? This is meant to help me do my taxes. It doesn't necessarily belong in an art museum like a Picasso. It doesn't necessarily belong on stage like a cello, or it doesn't feel that way. So that's the thing you gotta get your head around. So over the years, I've come up with all sorts of ridiculous ways to try to make that leap. Some of them are psychedelic visuals, right? So ways to turn a sound into an image. This is one of those things, right? This is listening to me also. Right? So this is listening to my voice, trying to have these folded origami birds that kind of surf around. I've thought about other ways to do it with, accelerating media. I'm just going to show you a few things. One of the things that I think is really kind of fun once you get into a situation where you can turn a sound into an image and an image into sound is to use it to make new material. So I'm just going to talk into my computer for 1 second. My dog has fleas. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, what does this do? Does this make any sound? My dog has fleas. Testing 1. Hey, that's cool. Okay, so this is a sonogram. My dog has fleas. Testing 1. So this is one of those like pretty standard ways to like visualize sound, right? So this is like the red line is time. the low stuff over here, like these are low frequencies, these are high frequencies. The height of the mountains is how loud something is at that point in time. But the dirty little secret about this piece of software is it didn't actually record my voice, it just made the picture. So what you're hearing is it's scanning the picture back into sound. So that lets you do some things you're not supposed to be able to do. My dog has fleas. Testing 1, 2, 3. Like you can freeze time and move it really slowly. Right? Or you can play it really fast. Or really, really fast. Right? Or you can say, well, you know, it's a picture. One of the things we could do is we could blur it. Right? And then we could like play it back again. And that's what I sound like blurred. And you're like, sure. And you're like, well, you know, I blur images all the time, right? Like you retouch images in Photoshop, why wouldn't you do that with sound? So you're like, well, what the heck are you going to do with this? So I came up with a whole bunch of things. So like a couple of them just really quick. This is the first project I did with this technique. This is about taking every #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 and speeding it up to 1 second for every week it was at #1. So in 37 minutes, you get the whole history of the American pop chart. Make sense? So like if a song lasts 10 weeks at #1, it lasts for 10 seconds. Lasts for 1 second at #1, lasts for 1 second. Some of these songs are kind of funny. You're going to hear the Chipmunk song in a minute. I think it's right here. Yeah, Chipmunk song, yeah. Let's see. Some of these are fun. Like all of 1978's in the same key. Basically means that like Andy Gibb from the Bee Gees can only sing one note. That's really what that's telling you. If you grew up listening to pop radio, and many of you did, you have part of this memorized, whether you like it or not. So you can be like, I love that song, I hate that song, I lost my virginity right there, whatever it is, right? You got some of it stuck in your head. And I think that this trick of accelerating time or averaging things or coming up with some like whatever you call it, like the 50,000-foot view of a situation, is a really interesting way to talk about and problematize media. So this thing led to a sequel. This is every Academy Award Best Picture, sped up to 1 minute. It's a completely unwatchable film. Let's find a bit that is... Oh, hey, that was him. Whoop. There we go. This is Casablanca. Right? The whole movie is in here. I'm not skipping, I'm averaging. Right? So like if it's an hour and a half long film and they need to make it 1 minute, right? It's like 180 frames in, 1 frame out, 180 frames in, 1 frame out. So the whole movie is in here, but I submit that this is pretty easy to read as Casablanca, right? Rick still looks like Rick. Ilsa still looks like Ilsa. Paris still looks like Paris. You get the idea. If you move to something more modern like Chicago, whoa. Chicago's a lot harder to read. And the reason for that is because the average length of a cinematic shot in the 1940s was like 26 seconds, right? It was still shot like theater, right? Like, so we would do like a whole scene without cutting. By the 2000s, it's down to 6 seconds, right? It's kind of like a music video. I rounded this piece out by doing this. This is every Playboy Playmate of the month. 50 years of Playboy in 50 seconds. So this is sort of time-lapse pornography. The three of these things taken as, this is like Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia is really great. It's like David Lean's life flashing before his eyes. It's like, how did I manage to make a 4-hour-long film with no women in speaking roles? So then if you take, if we take all these together, let's see if I can take all these together. You know, these are all lists. These are all things on lists. These are all American cultural canons. But what we don't necessarily think about is how they get chosen, right? So like we live in a democracy where our number one songs involve the collusion of several major multinational corporations. Our best picture lists are done as a peer review. And don't even get me started about Playboy, right? So like these are not necessarily democratic pieces of media or democratically chosen media. So I thought it's kind of interesting to kind of think of it that way. Let's see, what are a couple of other things? So I also do a lot with words, and we'll probably talk about this when Anne and I talk, and I'll try to show you this pretty quickly, but this is a piece that I have up in Santa Fe right now, and it's celebrating its, oh my God, is it 2018? Yeah, it's celebrating its 10th year. It's depressing. And so this is a project that I did for the 2008 Democratic National Convention. They asked me to do something with words, which was, you know, a really unhelpful prompt, frankly. But I had to come up with something. And the original idea was a bad idea, actually. I was going to make like a Billboard Hot 100 of things presidents say all the time, like God bless America, I'm not a crook, I'm not stuff. And I was really lucky because I had this kind of spark of inspiration. I was working in Santa Barbara. I was working at this place called the American Presidency Project, which is this amazing digital humanities archive at UC Santa Barbara. And I was. Y'all remember this TV show Crossfire? You guys know what I'm talking about? Right. So one of the guests on the Crossfire, that old CNN show, was James Carville, was President Clinton's domestic policy advisor. And he was on a rant. I was watching the show on repeat at like 3 a.m, working on this piece. And the word he kept using about George W. Bush, who was president at the time, was vision. He kept saying the problem with him is he doesn't have any vision. So the way you test someone's vision is you make an eye chart. So these are eye charts. There's one for every president of the United States. This is George Washington's eye chart. So what this is telling you is a gentleman is the word that he uses in his State of the Union addresses more than any other president. So if he uses it 60 times, nobody else uses it 60 times. And this is the word he uses the most of those words he uses more than anybody else. So these are like the 66 most kind of like unique words in his eye charts, in his speeches, in the State of the Union. George W. Bush, who was president at the time I made this piece, his number one word was terror, right? And the way you get from gentleman to terror in 43 easy steps is kind of a history lesson, right? It's a way to talk about American history. Bill Clinton spent most of his speeches talking about the century in which he would no longer be president, right? Ronald Reagan's number one word was deficits, right? Richard Nixon, interestingly, his number one word was truly, which you think is kind of strange until you remember that Richard Nixon's speechwriter was an amateur linguist named Bill Sapphire who counted words. And nobody knew he counted words until I caught him, right? Lyndon Johnson was the first president to give this speech on primetime television. So he began every paragraph with the word tonight. Otherwise, it would have been Vietnam, right? So you see how this works. They are big eye charts. They're they're light boxes. They're these big light boxes. They're to scale. So if you can stand 20 feet back and you can read that line, you have 20/20 vision. It's important to make things that are useful. And these are, and they also have a version that are letterpress. So they're sort of 3/4 size, which is the ones they usually show. And so these things, right? I mean, this is a great place to talk about this because just down the street are the things I was sort of modeling on. These things are portraits, right? This is a portrait series of the American presidency in a way not dissimilar to what they have down the street at the NPG, right? Where you start with Gilbert Stuart's Lansdowne portrait, and you end most recently with Candace Wiley's portrait of Barack Obama, right? So this is the same idea. This is not about what they look like, it's about what they say. And it's a cool data set, but it's not a particularly democratic data set. So I started looking for some other sets of words that maybe have a little bit more of a democratic character. In the sequel for this piece that I did, which was in 2010, was I decided to make a census. And the census, it's pretty funny. The way this went down is I joined 21 different online dating sites. As a straight man, a gay man, a straight woman, and a gay woman in every zip code in America, and downloaded 19 million people's dating profiles. I have obsessive compulsive disorder. This will be really obvious if you haven't figured this out yet. And I made maps. Okay, so just like the census. So I collected the data the summer of 2010. Same time everybody's walking around counting how many people they are and what kind of jobs we have, right? I was downloading 20% of the adult single population of the United States to a hard drive, and then make maps. So I could tell you where everybody's funny. Nebraska is not funny at all. Right? This is where people say they're funny. This is where people say they're lonely. Lonely people tend to concentrate in Appalachia. Don't know why. Folks who are shy tend to be in the upper Midwest. This is the kinky map. So what this is telling you is that men in southern New Mexico need to get together with women in West Virginia and have a good time. And then you do the same trick as the eye charts, but instead of it being about time, it's about space. So like if you've ever dated anybody from Seattle, this makes perfect sense, right? So these are words. This is where I've replaced the name of every city in America with the word people use more in that city than anywhere else. And we have a big map upstairs of the whole country that sort of shows this. But if you've ever dated anybody from Seattle, this makes perfect sense, right? Heartbreak and Pretty, right? Like they play in a freaking band, they smoke, right? This all makes sense. This is Redmond, Washington, which is the headquarters of Microsoft. Their number one word is email. Some of these you can guess. So like LA's number one word is acting, right? San Francisco, the number one word is gay. Santa Cruz is liberal. I grew up somewhere, let's see, I grew up somewhere between annoying and cynical in New Jersey. Does that make sense? New York City's number one word, I'll get to dinosaur in a minute. New York City's number one word is now, as in now I'm working as a waiter, but actually I'm an actor, right? That's a pretty common New York phrase. If you go upstate, Syracuse, New York's number one word is dinosaur. Right, and then you think to yourself, why the heck is it dinosaur? But you have to remember where this stuff came from. This came from online dating sites. So dinosaur barbecue is the best place to eat in Syracuse, New York. So that's where you take somebody on a date, right? Lincoln, Nebraska is the same thing. Its number one word is Osaka, which is the name of the trendy downtown sushi restaurant, right? It's the same idea. Washington, D.C., number one word is interesting. which I will let you think about. I have this down to the zip code level. So you can actually cruise around the entire city and find out what people are talking about where, which I think is kind of interesting. If you think this feels a little anodyne or maybe not representative, you have to remember what's actually going on under the hood. All of these words are unique. So they're about tiny, tiny percentage margin calls. If it was the most common word, right, everywhere would be love and Los Angeles would be sex, right? That's how that would work, right? So these are all about like tiny, tiny differences. So the flaw here is that if there's like a town in like Iowa with only 4 single people and one of them really likes snowboarding, 25% of the town likes snowboarding, and they'll get the word, right? So that's the trick. But anyway, it's called a more perfect union. Not everything I do. I'll just show you one more thing, and then we'll all hang out and talk. Not everything I do is super funny in that way. So this is something that's a little bit less funny. This is a gun. This is a gun. This is a Walter PPK 9mm semi-automatic that is a very common gun that was used in a shooting in the French Quarter of New Orleans about 3 years ago on Valentine's Day in an argument over parking in front of this house. So 2 people got into a fight over this parking space and shot each other dead from their cars. Those are my cigarettes. I don't smoke anymore, though. This is a barbecue I ate. This is the hard-to-find drawer at the hardware store, which was itself hard to find. And this is a piece a little bit using technology that we now refer to as the Internet of Things, which usually means there's no internet and there's no thing, but this is the idea that like, you know, your car can turn on your coffee maker, that kind of thing. And so the way this works is you take the gun, you drill a little hole in the trigger, you weld it, well, you build this big chain mechanism. This is my buddy Cole Wiley who helped me with this. You take the gun and you weld it down to a big base so nobody can steal it. You go home, you get attacked by roosters. You take this mechanism, which has a computer attached. There's a very small single chip computer in here. You take this whole mechanism and you throw it under a box with a little wire hooked up. And it turns out that one of the many things Eric Holder did when he was Attorney General of the United States is he passed a regulation with the assistance of my dear colleague Beth Novak, who runs this thing called the Gov Lab at NYU, but was the sort of instigator between the data.gov movement. Passed this regulation that said every city with more than 100,000 people in it in the United States has to have an open data feed for crime, right? Which means that you as a citizen need to be able to look on a website and be able to find out things like 911 calls, criminal activity in your zip code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the way this works is the computer's online and it's listening to New Orleans, and the way it works is anytime someone's shot in New Orleans, it fires, right? And so there's blanks loaded into this gun, so there's no bullet that pierces the case, but there is a cartridge, right? So let's look at the cartridge for a sec. So New Orleans has something around, on average, 5 or 6 shootings a day. So that vitrine, fills up with bullets pretty fast, right? And this is the problem. And this is a problem I want to make a quick pitch for you, and then we'll sit down. Which is a data visualization can be a really bad scene. which is to say that when we start to see bar graphs on a newspaper instead of photographs, right? What we're doing is we're basically surrendering to the anesthetization of data. We're allowing people to be treated as numbers, not as people. And that kind of stresses me out a little bit. And what this project is about, this is called Take a Bullet for the City. It's currently in Philadelphia. It was here over the election, actually. What this is about is about confronting you with kind of a really horrible fact, which is that once you read about this piece and you read the little label and you know what it means, part of you, no matter how hard you try, is still kind of disappointed if it doesn't go off while you're there. And that's a really crappy thing to have to think about. But I think it's something we should think about. So anyway, that's my stuff. Why don't we, Anne, you want to hang out? Should we hang out and talk? Cool, we're going to hang out and talk. I'm going to move my computer over here. Oh. Here. We're going to sit. Yes, it reached. I'm super impressed. Cool? So we're going to hang out here.
Excellent.
All right. How's everybody doing? All right. Thanks. Let me drink a water. Sit down. Let's all right.
Well, you can see very plainly why I thought it was such a good idea for Luke to help kick us off by saying a little bit about his own projects. Sorry, the sound seems a little intense. Maybe it can be modulated a little bit for us. I have had just the best time getting to know Luke over several years. I think in large part because his projects are both very, very powerfully and beautifully executed at this level of technical excellence, and yet somehow through this remarkable combination of humor and reflection, Luke always ends up with pieces that make me think. They often make me chuckle, but they always make me think. And when I learned from JD about this wonderful program that the NAS was holding this week in honor of the 50th anniversary of Cybernetic Serendipity, which took place in 1968, Luke instantly sprung to mind as an artist who seemed to epitomize the vision that Yasha Reichart had in 1968. And I love the fact, Luke, that you commented about the fact that Clinton in the late 20th century was so focused on the century in front of him. And I think we could say that sort of the same thing is true of Yasha Reichart. And of course, what's exciting now is standing on, although she's quite petite, her giant shoulders. We're now in an amazing opportunity. I think we now have an amazing opportunity to stand on the shoulders of yet another giant, this man to my left, and to think a little bit more about where we are at a moment in which art, technology, science seem, and I think this is a good thing, increasingly difficult to parse apart. So I have just put together a few questions and categories of dimensions of Luke's work that I thought might be fun to tease out in the course of this conversation. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start with just a few topics that I'm eager to hear him speak about, and then we'll open the floor. So we're really, really looking forward to having the opportunity to benefit from all of the expertise that we know is gathered in this audience. But Luke, just as the point of departure, I am very struck by the emphasis on the events this past week on the notion of collaboration and creativity. And I just sort of want to zero in on both your sense of what creativity looks like writ large, but perhaps as a way of getting at that, to think about the role of collaboration. I'm struck by the fact that you often describe yourself as a collaborator.
Yeah.
So would love to hear more about that.
I this is, there's those signs in in shop in high school that says never work alone. Do you know what I'm talking about? Right. It's all about sort of safety and so it's like safety in numbers. So I try never to work alone, and I work with a lot of really amazing people. A few of them are here actually. My buddy Bora Yoon is over there. Paul Moon is over there. Claire is over here, down there. People I work with, and I'm super excited to always work with folks who bring things to the table that are so far beyond how the sort of I don't really do much. I just sort of type fast, but a lot of people have these really amazing artistic voices that I can kind of synergize with in nice ways. I was a week ago, I was in Sarasota. I was back at the Ringling for a retrospective of a really, really amazing friend of mine named Tony Dove, who's somebody really everybody should know. And she is sort of the godmother of interactive cinema. She'll film feature-length movies and then edit them on stage as a performance. And she's been doing this for a very long time, sometimes in an installation context, sometimes literally on stage. And we were playing a gig together. Down in Florida, outdoors, and it was the wind was knocking everything out. It was crazy. It was super fun. But one of the things that I always loved about working with Tony is I'm her software engineer. I build the machines that she puts her media into, right? So she sort of films these projects and comes up with all the narrative, and then we'll talk about ways to create interactive narrative engines, right? So maybe I can show you this actually. Let me show you something real quick. This will be funny. So she has a film called Spectropia, and the main plot of the film is it's about a woman in the future who builds a time machine. And the way the time machine works is she can scan garbage from the future and then see the moment when it was thrown out. So you can imagine scanning a Twix bar and then seeing the moment in 1984 when someone threw it in the trash, right? Or scanning a piece of cloth and then suddenly being transported back to the 19th century when it was discarded. And one of the characters that the protagonist encounters on this is Sally Rand, right, who's a fan and bubble dancer in the 1920s and 30s. And this is Helen Pickett from the Worcester Group sort of personifying Sally Rand. And I don't know if you can tell, but I'm controlling this film by waving my hands in front of it. I'm scrubbing back and forth and then going between a far shot and a near shot, right? And this is the kind of machine I built for her. So what this thing is doing is it's looking at my camera, right, and allowing me to change perspective. And it's a very simple trick. There's kind of nothing to it, but you can do these really powerful kind of embodied interactions with it. And so that's what she sort of does on stage is I build this technology for her. And that's a really nice kind of idea of a collaboration, right? The idea that, like, we're going to work on something together that neither of us would do independently, right? To make something that's kind of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, yeah.
And it's so interesting, Luke, actually thinking about that performance. One of the things that I've also gained so much from in getting to know you is, I think, epitomized by that piece. And actually, we could go on to another slide just for a moment, which is a piece that I hope you all will have an opportunity to see upstairs. Slides never do justice to the original work of art. And I have to say, big compliment to our colleagues here at the National Academy. I don't think Fashionably Late for the Relationship has ever looked more beautiful than it does here at the National Academy. And this is another collaboration, and I'll ask you to say more about it in a moment, Luke. But it combines performance, it combines music, it combines the visual, it combines technology. And something that I've been struck repeatedly about with respect to your work is the way in which I perceive lessons that you have garnered as a musician entering into your way of processing and synthesizing diverse streams of stimuli. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that in also unpacking this extraordinary piece.
So this thing, we did this in so the performance for this piece. This is a collaboration that I did with the woman on the chaise lounge here, whose name is Leon Amaris, and she's a performance artist who I was collaborating with for pretty seriously, like a decade ago, and we worked on I worked on some like media design for one of her theatrical pieces, and she is normally a monologuist. So she's normally, sort of it's a little Spalding Gray style. She's seated at a table speaking to you, right? And I am definitely not in any way, shape, or form a filmmaker. And so we decided to do this big collaboration together where we were both a little bit out of our comfort zone, where she would do a long-form silent performance, so she has no text to speak, and I would try to shoot a movie of it. And so what we decided to do, this is how things get out of hand, is we decided to do this thing where we got a hold of a traffic island in New York for 72 hours. And she spent 72 hours out there continuously doing 72 minutes worth of activity in slow motion. And then I filmed the whole thing and then reversed the process. So it looks like she's moving normally and everything else is flying by, right? There's no CGI, there's no special effects, there's none of that, right? It's a public performance, it's sort of a living diorama, so there's an audience walking in and out of the frame all the time, but unless they stand still for long enough, they disappear in the film, right? There's all these things that mark time, so this will come up. She will, do her thing, there's music. So she'll write in her diary, she'll eat some food. Everything that she's doing as slowly as possible. Anything that she can't do slowly, she does repetitively. So when she smokes, she'll smoke 15 cigarettes in a row to take up the time. You can see the heartbeat of the traffic light, right? This is Park Avenue in New York. So it's on a 1 second clock because it's a 1 minute thing. You can see the clock behind her, right, showing time. She's wearing a watch. Anything that happens in a performance that took an hour takes a minute in the film. Anything that took a minute in the performance takes 1 second in the film. Right? So she does her thing. She talks on the phone. Right? The sun goes down. Right? She'll talk on the phone. What else will she do? She'll do her hair and makeup. Right? It takes her about 16 hours to pick out a dress. It takes her 5 hours to do her nails on one hand, which may or may not feel like a long time for you. And, she tries on all these dresses, and eventually, on the third night, she puts on this kind of 7-year itch number and goes and hails a cab. And that's the end of the performance. This is her performance, and this is the performance is very much about some things she was thinking of in the time about public and private space. It was a little bit of like a Julia Kristeva riff, right, about like how women experience time different than men. And part of it was on our side exploring this kind of pet peeve we both had about the mediatization of performance and the fact that it is often mistaken as co-equivalent, right? Like the film of a dance is not the same thing as watching a dance live, right? So we were trying to kind of get to the bottom of that. And so we decided to make this crazy media version of a performance that only happened once. And if you saw it, you saw it. And if you didn't, you didn't. And now we've got this document that's something else, right? It's something very different. And we, and then my buddy Todd Reynolds and I scored it, right? We turned it into kind of a symphony.
It's interesting to my mind. It almost has the effect of being a little bit like a dance between two partners. That it's not the product of just one person's ingenuity, but that it really is about this relationship between her as a performer, you as a creator, and then maybe also even to some degree with the technology itself.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that also really interests me as we think about this notion of collaboration is the role that the computer, mathematics, and specifically algorithms, which I know you've put a lot of thought into, play as a creative dimension of your work.
Yeah. I think a lot about the things you can do with. So the thing about technology is it's like a, what do they call it? Like a moral panic when you're like, computers are ruining art or whatever. It's like I say this all the time, and you've heard me say this a million times, but this whole like every civilization will use the maximum level of technology available to it to make art, and that's okay, right? So like if we have computers, we're going to make creative works with them. If all we have are pencils, that's what we're going to go with, right? It's okay. And they don't replace, they tend to add, right? So there was a whole, freak out in the 1920s with the advent of radio, that it was going to kill the idea of the musical instrument in the home. Right? The idea that like as soon as we get radios and phonographs in, nobody's going to play piano anymore. But it doesn't work that way, right? That's not how this works. Things don't replace, they just add. There's a little bit of a sort of Darwinian thing with certain aspects of the technology where like, a DVD is better than a videotape maybe. So like that gets rid of that, but that doesn't mean video art disappears, right? Does that make sense? So like I think about that a lot. And so this was sort of a riff on the fact that in 2007 it was reasonably possible to do a multi-camera high-definition film shoot and do this acceleration technique to it. I had computer technology that would let me kind of do these high quality averages of video. So this isn't it. So again, just like the Academy Award piece, this is not a time lapse. The whole, all 72 hours are in here. They're just averaged and edited in funny ways to try to get it all complete. Right?
Well, it's so interesting to me. Luke and I were chatting a little bit before the audience arrived about his work and topics that we thought might be fun to get at in this afternoon's conversation. And I was saying to Luke that I think it's so interesting that this happens to be on view, and that he and I and all of us have an opportunity to think about its manipulation of duration the same week that, of course, very sadly, we have lost Stephen Hawking. But I have to admit, when I was thinking about what pieces might be especially nice in the context of the National Academy, the very thorny, contested nature of time, particularly in the 20th century, was on my mind, and it's extremely interesting to see how this physical substance of time figures as a dimension of your work, Luke, in the 21st century. And I love the fact that among the signifiers in this artwork are clocks that are sort of out of whack, and maybe sort of a subtle but really interesting reminder of the challenges we all face when we monitor our behaviors or our expectations to technologies that are so ubiquitous. We don't really recognize them or notice them unless they start to go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like looking at, I like making projects where you have to sort of pay attention and know what's off. Mm-hmm. I mean, the dating maps are a little bit like that, right? So the thing with the map upstairs even is you know, at first you're like, wait a minute, that's just the United States. Mm-hmm. Why would I care about that? And then it like takes you a minute to like zoom in on the words and be like, how come? What the heck? Why is Dallas rich? Mm-hmm. Right? What does that mean? Right? And why is Houston symphony and this is Houston, right? The other way around. Houston's rich. Dallas is symphony and tux, right? That's pretty good. Or why is it? What is it? I always forget what Atlanta is, but Atlanta is like Coca, God, Company, Jazz, and Protestant. Sure. That makes perfect sense to me. So it's like, why do these things show up where they are? But it takes you a minute to catch it. And the thing we did, what was it, 2 summers ago when I was with you? Do you remember this thing with the So this is this is the opposite of fascia delay. This is about slowing things down. So the way that this works is the challenge here is, how do you make portraits of musicians, right? So this is the problem, right? So how do you make a portrait of a musician? Because taking a photograph of a musician doesn't seem to do anybody any justice, right? Because you're robbing them of the primary degree of freedom in which they work, which is time. So the way this works is I would write these string quartets, right? So I would write these like, short little, whatever, short little like 30-second string quartets or whatever, right? Just like little pieces. But then what you do is you film the whole situation at very high speed. So what you're hearing when you play it back is you're hearing everything at 1/10 its normal speed. So this 30-second thing, right, becomes much longer. It becomes 10 times longer, right? It becomes 300 seconds. And all these weird things happen with the sound, right? So like, there are things you can see, right? So you start to be able to see the strings vibrate. Things like musical vibrato become like, microtonal. So if the violinist goes, you hear it go, but also acoustic space expands. So even though this was recorded in a pretty intimate place, it sort of sounds like it's in a much bigger place, which is an old Motown trick, right? They used to they would tell you they had some like secret place where they recorded the vocals, but they didn't. They just recorded the vocals in a vocal booth and then played it off a tape deck at the top of a stairwell and recorded it at the bottom of the stairwell. But they played the tape at the top of the stairwell too fast, so it sounded like Alvin and the Chipmunks. And then when you play the tape down at the bottom slow again, everything sounds like it's in a big church. That's how they made the reverb for like Diana Ross, right? So it's a fun trick. So I think about that a lot. I think about ways you can use time to kind of manipulate things.
Yeah, it's interesting. In your another thing that I think comes out of a piece like this, which again to me harkens back to earlier chapters of the relationship between the visual art and technology, is the way in which you have thought so carefully about the relationship between sound and image, and the idea of image made visual, and maybe the ways in which the visual can suggest something audible to us. And I have to say, when I look at this fabulous portrait of the Jupiter Quartet, I also think a little bit with respect to reverb about a portrait that you made in 2010, which again is extraordinarily funny, but also profound. It reflects this humor and this philosophical, a lot of interesting philosophical questions. And that is your portrait of Britney Spears.
Yeah, that's good.
Which grew out, as I recall, of a particular challenge that was put forward by the Department of State. Is that?
DARPA, actually.
By DARPA. By DARPA. Okay.
I'll get through this one. This is funny. So here's a fun story. Oh, so I should tell you what my day job is. Well, you said what my day job is. But I teach at NYU. I don't teach... Yeah, there it is. I don't teach art, and I don't teach music. I teach engineering. I teach human-centered design, basically. It's a simplification, but that's a basic idea. At New York University School of Engineering. And every year, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency issues a public design challenge for engineering schools in the United States, right? So every year they come up with a thing where they say, here's something we're working on that we can be fairly open about, right? And we would love universities around the country to participate in helping us come up with solutions for it, and we'll put a bunch of money on the table to help, right? Does this make sense? So this is how we got all sorts of groovy things in the United States, like the internet, right? It's DARPA, right? So in January of 2002, they issued a challenge, and the challenge was really interesting that year. It was the following: if I give you a whole bunch of videotape, can you find me one specific person? And so you have to imagine in January 2002 who they were looking for. They were looking for someone very, very hard, and they wanted to enlist everybody's help in trying to find them. This is actually a good story. This is a good STEM advocacy story. The winning team for the competition was not out of MIT or Caltech. It was actually out of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is the largest public engineering school in the United States. And they solved it by coming up with something called a modified Haar cascade, which is a trick that you can do to find someone's face, right? And sort of isolate it from the rest of a frame, but it takes into account things like not just the kind of like Da Vincian kind of symmetry of a face, like your head is 5x7, that unit is the width of your eye, but also things like cheekbones and facial hair and your hairline. So I decided to implement it on the one person you never need to surveil that way, which is Britney Spears. And so I downloaded like, I don't know, a couple thousand paparazzi photos of Britney Spears and taught my computer to find her and her alone in any situation. And so the way this portrait works is I can feed video in, and it will find her in the frame and center her eyes, like lock her eyes. The sound from this, which I think is what you're referring to, are these recordings of her singing her hits without any accompaniment. They call them acapellas, and they're a pretty like they're a pretty key element in like fan remixing, right? So it's pretty common now for pop stars to effectively open source the vocal track of their songs to encourage fans to remix their work, right? Because there's really very little downside to that anymore, given the way the recording industry makes money. You're not actually going to lose money by having some kids in Atlanta, Georgia, say, take your vocal track and put a really great new drum set underneath it and upload it. It's just going to bring more popularity to your song. So Britney Spears puts out acapellas. She'll release acapellas. And these are all her vocal tracks run through the sampled reverberation of this basilica in Ravenna, Italy. It's full of Orthodox icons that somebody had made a impulse response of. They've done this trick where if you want to know what an acoustic space sounds like, one way to do it, this is another gun story, is to fire like a starter pistol in that space and record the echo, right? Because that will tell you how every frequency in the human hearing range responds to that acoustic. And so I got that data and ran her vocal through it. And so that's what it sounds like. She sounds like she's singing in a church. And this piece is shown, the piece is called a pop icon, right? So it's kind of a pun. But the idea is she, sort of sits in this pretty picture frame, right? Like a kind of stylized Byzantine icon. Yeah.
Luke, as I recall, isn't she one of the first recording artists to really take advantage of technology and the recording medium itself?
In that way, yeah. She's like the sort of first pop artist we had that sort of came of age in terms of auto-tune and also digitally retouched imagery, right? So like if you look back to much before her, there are plenty of other ways to retouch sound and image that aren't digital, but she's really the first one where we seldom encounter media of her, or like officially released media of her, where it's not retouched in some way, where her vocal isn't being treated and her the image of her isn't being retouched in some way. But it's also like a surveillance double standard, right? We hate the idea that we would be watched that way, right? The technology underneath this way of tracking faces is actually pretty out of date now. Now you would use a technology called machine learning to do this much more effectively. And that kind of scares us, but at the same time, we know what, we could probably figure out what she had for breakfast this morning by logging on to TMZ. And that's just like really unfortunate, kind of double standard that I think about, with her. That's really a drag.
It's interesting that you say that, because something that has also very much struck me about your approach to technology, Luke, is a comment that you made during your 2016 TED Talk, in which you acknowledged the role of technology in art making, but then suggested that the role of the artist is to critique that, to ask questions of the technology and its larger role in our society. And as long as we're talking a little bit about artificial intelligence, I wonder if you could comment on a very recent project which was on display in late 2016 in New York about artificial intelligence and this really interesting question of what it means to make choices.
Yeah, so this is the last big art show I did, and it was right before the election. What I did was I got a bunch of old voting machines. These are old voting machines, sort of from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. They're ignore the screen for a minute and just concentrate on the kind of physical affordances, right? They're basically sort of analog computers. They're little counters, right, that you flick a switch and they're mechanical. They're quite secure. They're designed to be quite secure. The people who have the keys to the front of these are not the people who have the keys to the back of them, right? So if I'm at the polling place, I'll have keys to enable it to vote. If Anne's at the warehouse for counting, she'll have the keys to enable the back to be open to count. But we don't know each other and we never talk, right? So that's the sort of security model of these old mechanical voting machines. And I was really interested around the election of looking at what it actually means to choose things and what does it mean to select things and how does that relate to these kind of newish trends in AI where we're using machine learning and artificial intelligence to sort of make choices, to make decisions in lieu of human intervention, right? So an easy, sort of like a lighthearted example of that is that thing Amazon.com does when it suggests books to you, right? That's a computer doing that based on past behavior you've made on that site. That's not like there's a personal shopping assistant somewhere. There's no person in Seattle sitting there being like, oh my God, Anne really likes these cookbooks, right? That's a computer doing that, right? So that's maybe like, you're like okay with that, but that very same technology with a tiny little adjustment could be used, for example, by a court judge to decide whether someone should be granted parole or not if they've been arrested, right? It can look at past behavior, a bunch of independent factors about their life, and then give like a 0 to 9 scale on whether it would be in the interest of the state to preemptively incarcerate them or not. And that's maybe not a great idea because that's a computer too, right? And so I think about that a lot, and that's one of the things that sort of like keeps me up at night. I'm not the only one that keeps up at night, thank God, but there's other people who are way smarter than me working on the same problem. But I wanted to riff on that, and so I made these crazy machines, these voting machines, where you got to choose stuff. But it's not candidates, it's like things like words. So this big guy, the way it works is it's full of Myers-Briggs values. So instead of voting for candidates, you say like, I want somebody who's like kind and caring and sensitive and interesting and funny and brave and what, and you vote. And then it tries to find you somebody online with those characteristics, and it almost always fails because the only time you ever say such nice things about somebody is when they're dead, so you always get obituaries. And that's a drag, right? Because that's the only time you ever get that whole, like, Fred was kind and consistent and caring, and right? We never say that about anybody when they're alive, except in movie reviews of Jennifer Lawrence. That's the other thing that shows up all the time. But so that's where those characteristics come to the forefront. And I was, I ran an exit poll, so I had this this is me making fun of CNN. So I had this exit poll that showed how people were voting as they left the gallery. It was a good time. This is this feels like the last year has been kind of exhausting. I'm sure it's been exhausting for all of you too. So like I've sort of forgotten, this wasn't that long ago. This was November 2016 I did this project. But yeah, this is something I think about for sure.
Well, this note of personal engagement and agency seems like a perfect one on which to open the floor to members of the audience. And needless to say, I have a couple of things still up my sleeve, but I do know that there are some just extremely knowledgeable people in the audience, artists, engineers, computer scientists, musicians, filmmakers. So please have at it. We're eager to hear your questions, observations.
I have one request. There's a microphone on this side and that side. We are webcasting live, so if you wouldn't mind going to the microphone with your question, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, JD.
Yeah. We can probably, is it wireless? Can we pass it? No, it's not wired. It's wired down. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a few technical questions. What languages do you prefer for your workflow, scraping, pre-processing, etc.? And are there any packages or libraries that you find particularly interesting?
Oh, yeah. I use all sorts of stuff. So, computer-wise, so I started programming, it's weird. I got a computer kind of young. I got a computer when I was 9. I asked my pop for a bike, and he bought me a computer. He was in this like really
smart man.
He was in this like anti-bike mood. Like my sister's 10-speed had gotten stolen, so he did one of these like bicycles are an infinite waste of money, and I was like, okay, Pop, whatever. So he got me a computer, and so I've been programming since I was like a kid. So I actually I've never in my life taken a computer science class, right? I had no idea what I'm doing. And so there's many languages in which I have no idea what I'm doing. One of them which I helped write is called MaxMSP, right? And so this is a visual programming language that's got quite a cool pedigree. It dates from the 1980s, and it was developed at a place called IRCOM, which is the largest electronic music research facility in the world. And if you don't know about this, it's underneath the Pompidou Center. It's underneath and behind the Pompidou Center in Paris. So you have to imagine yourself, the next time you're there enjoying modern art, underneath your feet are hundreds and hundreds of French computer nerds doing music research, right? And they created this programming language in the 1980s. It was developed by a guy named Miller Puckett. And the premise of it is it's a visual programming language. So instead of learning it like a programming language, you learn it like a foreign language. You hook up these words, and these words mean different things. And then you flow the data, right? So, and this is one of the very first kind of computer music languages, but it's also one of the first kind of creative coding languages. So I just made a program that will generate what we call in the business random atonal crap. Right? This is random crap, right? So this is like a metronome. A metro object is a metronome. When I send it a 1 off of this checkbox, it starts counting. All of these things are written in C++. So one of the languages I use a lot is C++. But I also use Python and JavaScript and all sorts of things. The online dating project, the scraper was written in Ruby on Rails. Some of the more recent things I've done have used Python more and more because of the natural language processing library. So I'll use stuff like Spacey, if you know what that is. That's a really great library for NLP, open source library out of Python. Sorry, this is turning really nerdy really fast. But this is, but I'll just use whatever works, right? So the Misconnections project is Java, not JavaScript, Java. But I'll make things in JavaScript as well. I teach in a whole panoply of languages, so I sort of have like a, kind of journeyman understanding of a bunch of stuff instead of an in-depth understanding of anything, which is not a bad, which is probably a terrible thing to do if you're an engineer, but it's fine if you're an engineering professor. So that's kind of how that works. Yeah, I'll use all kinds of things. What else? Y'all are like, what the heck happened? Yeah, sure. What am I working on now? So I just premiered a little project. Where the heck am I? Projects, desktop. There it is. Demo. Vids. Right. So I just did this portrait of Barack Obama. So the thing with the eye charts, those eye charts with the presidential speeches, he's missing from them because he wasn't president when I made them. And so instead of making an eye chart for him, I decided to make a hearing test. And so the way this works is it's, any of y'all have an Alexa? This is some funny code shit, actually, this thing. So Alexa, right, so that's a thing you can, like Amazon makes it, and you can have it on your kitchen table and ask it about movie times and whatever. So I made a custom Alexa service where you can ask questions of Barack Obama. And so the way it works is you ask him a question. So, so it says ask a question, and you're like, what am I going to ask? I don't know. Yes, so I ask him, are you ever afraid? Right? And then I have 430 of his speeches all topic annotated. And what'll come back...
And everybody can feel threatened sometimes if people don't do things exactly the way they do things. I think he genuinely wants to get something done. They knew him as somebody who was not afraid. I don't think they feel that way. I will never hide the truth because it's uncomfortable.
So what you do is you get a bunch of sentences back that relate to what you asked. Right, so like I can ask, like, how do I keep my kids from dropping out of school? And you'll hear things he said about education.
This is about these families and families all across the country who are saying, let's make it a little harder for our kids to get gunned down. She's trying to put her daughter through college, just like probably some of your moms.
Right, so like some of it, sometimes, like depending on what you ask, right, it might directly relate or it might sort of indirectly relate. But it's also it's just an interesting portrait, or I think it's an interesting